good morning and welcome to Chapel Next. I'm Chaplain Williams. Jameson's my first name. You can call me Jameson. I'm one of the team chaplains here at Chapel Next, and we're excited that you're here today. What we're about here at Chapel Next is really about God's work. We're about God transforming lives, both through intentional worship and integrated worship, as well as intentional discipleship. So as you are here, we're thankful for this part of us being together, but we encourage you to come and be further together with us in this chapel community. So please note that we have Sunday school directly following this, as well as a fellowship time in between. And we invite you to plug in with us in that way and to become part of that. And I also want to suggest to you that maybe you can be involved in one of our community groups that meets here as part of Chapel Next. All that information is there in your bulletin. Together, let's worship God today. Let's be about God's work. And part of that is recognizing who God is and what God's doing in this place. Hear now the word of the Lord from Psalm 36. Your love, O Lord, reaches to the heavens, your faithfulness to the skies. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains, your justice like the great deep. O Lord, you preserve both man and beast. How priceless is your unfailing love. Both high and low among men find refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house. You give them drink from your river of delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light, in your life, we see light. Worship with us. Please, let's stand and sing together for a moment. Praise God that He is holy. He is the shelter. He is our comfort. I don't know about you, I find myself in moments like those when I recognize how great He is, seeing myself and how ungreat I am. We come to a time in worship where we recognize where we are and recognize that we don't match up. But that's not where it stops. Because He promises that as we confess, He is faithful. As your heart leads you today, I want you to pray with me for the things that are in your hearts, that He's exposed inside of you. This is not something that's formal that we have to go through in these certain steps, but it's something that's in your heart that's between you and God. I will pray, and I invite you to pray what I pray between you and God. Pray with me. Our Father, you are holy, you are holy, holy. Father, I recognize that I don't match up with what you have in store for me. I'm unprepared to see your face because inside of me there are things that are broken that I ask, Lord Jesus, that you would fix, that you would mend, that you would even break inside of me so that I might become what you would want me to be. Our God, we cry for mercy. We cry for covering. Father, we thank you for being faithful. To you I call, O Lord my rock. Do not turn a deaf ear to me. For if you remain silent, I will be like those who have gone down into the pit. Hear my cry for mercy as I call to you for help, as I lift my hands towards your most holy place. Amen.
Welcome to Chapel Next. I am Chaplain John Manuel, and glad to be here today, continuing our series, The Road to Emmaus. That's the title of our series. And we've kind of reached the midpoint this week, this Sunday, on this 15-week sermon series. We're traveling down the road to Emmaus. If you haven't been with us on the journey so far, just to kind of recap where we've been. We're traveling down the road to Emmaus with those early disciples who went with Jesus and to whom Jesus told about revealed himself through creation, through the covenant, through the cross, and through the resurrection. Kind of laid out for them the whole span of time in the Bible and showed how all of those things pointed to himself. And we're kind of in the middle of that journey now today with the Exodus. And we'll be talking about that in just a minute. Last week we learned about God, the deliverer, who miraculously rescued Israel, the Hebrews, from the slavery of Egypt and Pharaoh, as he showed his supremacy over all of their gods, and provided Israel safe passage through the Red Sea as he destroyed the world's most powerful military force, the Egyptian army. Today, we pick up that story, the story of the Exodus, which is commonly known as, where God puts the Israelites through a rigorous 40-year character training program, essentially. And we'll get part of that training program today as we look through that. It was approximately, there's a map showing kind of the area that this story takes place in. It's interesting to note on that map that the distance between where the Israelites left Egypt, which is here, Goshen up north, probably see it from where you're sitting, to the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula, it's about 275 miles. And that happens to be the exact same distance as the length of the state of Washington, from the border of Canada to the border of Oregon. And so I want to kind of give you the context of where we're talking about and kind of put it in perspective of where we find ourselves today. Most Bible historians and archaeologists and the guys that really studied this pretty well, they contend that there are different points of crossing. They're not really sure exactly where they crossed the Red Sea. That's not really important. I don't think there's a lot of speculation on it. My own personal view on it from doing a lot of research and reading is that they probably crossed at the modern-day site of the Gulf of Aqaba, which is shown in that, depicted in that drawing you see before you. There's lots of reasons for that. If you want to get more details on that, why I think that's a compelling argument, you can look at a very well-done documentary called Search for the Real Mount Sinai, and that will explain some of the reasons for that choice. I also want you to notice on this map that the destination when they leave Egypt is where? Where are they heading? Where are they ultimately trying to wind up? Does anybody know? Wow, okay. They're trying to get to what's now modern-day Palestine, Israel, what was known then as Canaan. Okay, so given the route that you see on that map, isn't it a little strange that they don't, the shortest point between two, or shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line? That's hardly a straight line. They go all the way down south, and then they do this very circuitous route through what is now known as the Arabian Desert. There's a reason for that. As I mentioned earlier, it's a 40-year character training program. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let me tell you about the story, as we now have a better idea of the context and where it happened and how it relates to us today. One more thing. The Israelites numbered about 2 million. Okay, a little more than that, some people think. Plus a whole ton of livestock, sheep, cattle, donkeys, you name it. 2 million people traveling that distance. Let me put that in perspective for us here. If you take 2 million people and spread them out 10 abreast, 10 wide, down Interstate 5, they will stretch 150 miles. That's going from Tacoma all the way to Portland. And so one of the first things they come up with, one of the first issues and problems they encounter, of course, is crowd control. How do you control such a huge mass of people and all their livestock in a vast desert area? And God provides a very good answer and a good solution to that problem. He provides for them in the daytime a pillar of cloud to guide them, a physical thing to look at and see and follow. And at nighttime even provides them a pillar of fire. And they can travel under conditions of limited visibility, just like we can. And so all they have to do is look at that physical sign day or night, follow it, stop where it stops, camp where it stops, and then follow it again the next day. God provides that every day for them during that 40-year period. The desert is, of course, like any desert, it's a very inhospitable place to live. And there's some good points to that for the Israelites because there are not going to be a lot of enemies out there, not a lot of threats in this desert, because there's really not a lot of food and water to sustain human life out there. That works to their advantage. They don't have a lot of problems encountering the enemy, although they have a few little mix-ups with the Amalekites. But it works to their disadvantage because they only take a certain amount of food provisions for this journey. Okay, and on the way, of course, the provisions are running low, and many in the Israelite company, the Hebrews, begin to complain, kind of like soldiers in the field. The first thing they complain and grumble about is the food, the quality of the food or the lack thereof. And many of them even take the complaining to the extent that they would probably be better off returning to slavery under the Egyptians, who remember, had just tried to annihilate them in the Red Sea. They'd be better off back under that yoke, because at least then they'd have some good food to eat. So it gives you an idea of where their hearts were and where their attitudes were as they grumbled about food. God, again, just as God provided direction for them in the form of the cloud and the fire, He provides food for them as well. And the food comes in the form of quail. He sends basically enough quail, it's hard to imagine, enough quail to feed 2 million people. And He sends those quail to them every evening. Okay? And they all have to do is go out and gather. They don't even need a shotgun to shoot the things. You just go out there, pick them up, throw in a bag. It reads that way at least. Quail are pretty dumb birds. It's pretty easy to do that. So they have quail every evening. And then if that were not enough, He also provides them a substance called manna, which is basically a bread every morning. Okay, so free meat, free bread, every day, every night, every morning for 40 years. I imagine that they probably came up with some pretty creative recipes as to how to prepare bread and quail. Something like, maybe Bubba in the movie Forrest Gump, he had a myriad of recipes for shrimp. So that's just my own contention. It's not in the Bible. Don't take that with you today too far. Anyway, bread and quail, they have food, they have provision. God provides it all, and they know that God is the source of their provision. All they have to do, really, is to trust Him. It's a pretty easy journey. Follow the cloud, follow the fire, eat the quail, eat the bread. Life is good. But with that free food came a simple instruction, and that's kind of another indicator of where their hearts were, and we'll get into that more. But the simple instruction was you can only take as much bread as you needed for that day, for that period, for your family and for yourself. And the Israelites, for many times they'll do this. You'll see it's a pattern throughout. They do not trust God. They take the bread and they hoard it. And when they hoard it, it spoils overnight, and it's no good to eat the next day. So failure to follow instructions. As they continue to move through the desert, they begin to grumble about another essential thing in the desert, and that's water. There's always a shortage of water in the desert. Then God tells Moses then to take the elders, stand before a certain rock, to strike that rock with a staff. The staff is a symbol of power, not Moses' power, God's power, something that they would understand having lived in Egypt for so long. And after he does this, after he strikes the rock with the staff, water gushes out of the rock like a small river. It then forms probably something like a small lake, and they can sustain themselves from this source of water for some time. The Israelites then encamp near the base of a mountain called Mount Sinai. And again, there are different opinions as to where this mountain is. The historical or the traditional site is on the Sinai Peninsula. I think there's much more compelling reason to believe that it's actually in what is now Saudi Arabia. You can look at that documentary and see why I think that's true. Many scholars believe that as well. That's not so important. The important thing is that He gives them water. They encamp at the base of this mountain. And while there, God speaks to Moses from this mountain, this Mount Sinai. And here's what He tells him in chapter 19. He says, "Speak to the house of Jacob. Tell the people of Israel, you've seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. If you will listen obediently to what I say and keep my covenant, out of all peoples you'll be my special treasure. The whole earth is mine to choose from, but you're special. A kingdom of priests, a holy nation. This is what I want you to tell the people of Israel." And so Moses does that. He tells the people what God has told him, and they respond with something that is maybe not congruent with their former behavior. They say, "Everything God says, we will do." Very exuberant answer to Moses' telling them what God has told them to do, or asked them to do. Now that's a surprising answer, again, because given their track record up to that point, one would expect their answer to really be in honesty. We have not trusted you. We have not obeyed you so far, and we really are not fit for this mission you're calling us to. Please help us. That would have been an honest answer, but it's not their answer. And their answer reveals that they really do not understand either their position to God or their condition in relation to God. And so God gives them a few visual aids to help them understand it. He says to Moses, "Go to the people for the next 2 days. Get these people ready to meet the holy God. Have them scrub their clothes so that on the third day God will come down. they'll be fully prepared. On the third day, God will come down on Mount Sinai and make his presence known to all the people. Now, the washing of clothes demonstrates God's intent to help Israel realize that they're to be purified, okay, to be clean, to be set apart and untouched by sin. The actions themselves have no intrinsic value. They don't actually clean them and get rid of their sin. It's an object lesson. It's a visual aid. It helps them to realize that they're getting ready to be set on a mission from God, and they need to be separated from the rest of the culture around them. Okay, and the next visual aid God gives, he instructs them to build a clear rock boundary around the base of this mountain. In the documentary I mentioned, that there's evidence that boundary still exists. Unfortunately, the Saudis have gated off that whole area. You can't get in there. There's no tourism. But this rock boundary around the base of Mount Sinai provides another graphic reminder of the separation between God and man. And it tells the Israelites, and it tells us that man cannot approach God on his own terms. And if he tries to, he'll be killed. He'll die. That's what the instructions say. It's a strong and powerful visual aid. It's a warning that man cannot approach God in the way that he wants to. He's a holy God. He's separate. He's other. The final visual aids are kind of a collection. There's thunder, there's lightnings from the mountain, there's a thick cloud, there's a blast of a trumpet, there's smoke, and there's fire. And basically all of these object lessons are, to the Israelites, are to help them grasp that they are in far worse condition than they ever imagined. And likewise, that God is a far holier God than they ever imagined. And that's important. We'll come back to it. God then summons Moses to Mount Sinai, where he receives what we commonly know as the Ten Commandments. They're never called the Ten Commandments in the Bible. They're called the Decalogue, which are the 10 words of God. And we're told that God writes these 10 Commandments with his finger on 2 tablets of stone. The first 4 commandments describe how God's people should relate to God. And that then sets the stage for the next 6 commandments, which tell us how God's people should relate to each other. The commands are later summarized famously by Jesus as, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Here are the 10 Commandments so we can refresh our memories. Number 1, I am God your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of a life of slavery. No other gods, only me. Number 2, no carved gods of any size, shape, or form, of anything, whatever, whether things that fly or walk or swim. Don't bow down to them and don't even serve them, because I am God, your God. Number 3, no using the name of God, your God, in curses or silly banter. God won't put up with such irreverent use of his name. Number 4, observe the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Work 6 days and do everything you need to do, but on the 7th day is the Sabbath of God. Number 5, honor your father and mother. Number 6, no murder. Number 7, no adultery. Number 8, no stealing. Number 9, no lies about your neighbor. Number 10, no lusting after your neighbor's house, or wife, or servant, or maid, or ox, or donkey. Don't set your heart on anything that is your neighbor's. Okay, we're probably not lusting after too many donkeys or oxes, but again, you've got to take this in context. Those are an important piece of property back in the day. Okay, so Moses takes these commandments, he takes many other regulations from God, and he delivers them to the people, and again, they reply with, what do you think? Everything God says, we will do. And then they even say it again. Yes, we will obey. Again, an exuberant response to the list of these commands and regulations that Moses has received. Moses ascends the mountain again, and he then receives detailed instructions regarding the building of the temple, which will later be a model for the tabernacle. We're not going to go into that this week. That'll be next week, and that's very important. Altogether, it's important to know also that it takes Moses about 40 days to get all this information, all these instructions and regulations and commandments and laws from God. And in the process of those 40 days, the people grow impatient. They want their leader. They want someone to follow. And they convince Aaron, one of the key leaders in the tribe, to take the gold earrings they have, much of which came out of Egypt, to melt it down and to construct a golden calf. And that will then become their God. And they start worshiping this calf. And so when Moses is on his way down from Sinai, Joshua kind of meets him midway down the mountain, and they hear some noise going on in the camp. And Joshua says, whoa, sounds like there may be a battle or some kind of military engagement going on. We've got to get down there. And Moses listens and says, no, that is not the sound of a war. That's the sound of a party. And sure enough, when they get down to the base of the mountain, there's a huge party going on. The Israelites are worshiping this golden calf and doing lots of other immoral things. And Moses is, of course, disgusted with their behavior. Here's the people who have just received the commandments and regulations and instructions of God. In only a 40-day span, they've gone back to their old ways. A lot of that was from Egypt. Again, they took them out of Egypt, but they couldn't take Egypt out of the Hebrews very well. That took a lot of time, 40 years to be exact. And so Moses finally comes down with Joshua. He's frustrated, he's infuriated really with their behavior. He takes the tablets of stone with those commandments written on, he smashes them, partly to symbolize that Israel has now broken the covenant with God, at least temporarily. And he breaks them, and God even is so frustrated. God says, I'm ready to start over. That's the point that God has reached at this point. He said, I'll wipe this people out, and I'll start again with you, Moses. I'll start clean. Moses pleads with God to have mercy. He relents. God relents. He holds his hand. But still, Moses orders the camp to be purged of about 3,000 unrepentant idolaters, and then God also sends a plague and kills many others with that. That's where I'm going to end the story today, because I think there's enough content there to take out several key teaching points. And so that's where we go next. We have to try to do the hard work of taking a story that is in a completely different culture, long, long ago, and trying to bridge that gap between then and now and figure out, what does that story mean to us today? What does the Exodus and the Ten Commandments, how do those connect to our lives today here at Fort Lewis? And hopefully we can do that in the next few minutes. My contention is that it does connect in several important ways. Go ahead and flip that, thanks. First of all, I'd like to talk about how it connects in the terms of what the Exodus tells us about ourselves. And then my second point is simply, what does the Exodus tell us about God? And then a couple sub-points under each of those. So, as I start, though, I think it's important to remember that it's easy to read a historical account of the Bible like this one, and to read it from a completely disconnected vantage point, to think that, wow, those people were just so dumb. I mean, how could they do this? How could they got the law of God, he was guiding them in visual symbols of fire and cloud, and all these great things, giving them meat and bread every day for 40 years, and yet, how did they miss God? How were they so disobedient? It's easy to do that. It's easy to do that with any story in the Bible. And I want to warn you, I guess, to not take that path. That would be a path of great folly and risk, because Moses recorded this to show us that we are somehow implicated in the problems that they faced. Okay, it may not be evident right off the bat, but I'd like to show you in the next few minutes how we have connections to those problems. Okay, we are human beings too. And the things they faced and the sins they committed, we commit today, just in a different way. So let's keep that in mind as we go through this. And my first 2 points are simply, what does the Exodus tell us about ourselves? 2 things. Number 1, that we really don't trust God. And number 2, that to compensate for that lack of trust, we make our own gods. Okay, just like the Israelites do. So number 1, we don't trust God. Now, trust is kind of a tricky word because it has changed in its connotations for our language in our day and age, our modern age. We think trust is just about kind of this mental assent. Yeah, I trust. I believe that. And I believe in something. Trust for an ancient person, for an Israelite or a Hebrew, meant much more than that. It wasn't just belief in the God. They all believed in God, so there was a clear understanding. Trust meant action, and it meant action through obedience. Okay, I can illustrate this being a dad. My youngest is kind of a risk taker. She's almost 2 years old, and somehow we've gotten into this pattern where she likes to climb up on a chair and just launch off of it, as long as I'm within distance of catching her. And so we make eye contact, and she launches, and just right in the air, and I always catch her. We've done it enough times that she knows now that we have this proven track record with Dad that I'll always catch her. Now sometimes it gets a little hairy because she'll be coming down the stairs and there'll be 4 or 5 stairs in between us and she'll just, woo! I gotta really react quick. But my point in illustrating this is that she doesn't just trust me out of a mental understanding. She trusts me because we have this proven history together. She knows that every time she's jumped, I've caught her. And if she jumps again in the future, I'll most likely catch her again. Hopefully I never drop her. That's the kind of trust I'm trying to illustrate, and the kind of trust that the ancient Hebrews understood. It wasn't just a mental assent, yeah, I believe in God. No, I'm doing things in my life. I'm taking actual steps and actions to prove that I trust God. That's where the trust is proven. It's obedience. And my contention is that we really Can you flip it one more time? Thanks. We really have a trust problem in our day and age, in our country even. We don't trust God. Like the Israelites, we can look back just like them and say we have every reason to trust Him. There are many ways in which He's provided for us and guided us, and yet we still grumble. We still complain. We're still ungrateful because we want God to guide us, but we want Him to guide us on our terms. We don't want Him to guide us on His terms. And we live in a culture of entitlement, okay, where we think that God is obligated to instantly give us more than we really need, and that He's obligated to make us happy and to shield us from pain. And when we don't get what we want, or we don't get quite what we want, we refuse to trust that God knows best what's best for us and what timing is best for us as well. Now, because we generally do not trust God, we compensate for that by point two, flip that next, we make and trust our own gods, just like the Israelites did. Those are called idols or idolatry. There's a good reason that the second commandment, right at the top of the list, is you shall have no idols, no other gods but me. Don't worship, don't bow down to them, don't make them. It's very explicitly clear. And it's also ironic that the Israelites, as Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, and I remember the narrative, the first thing they do is what? They make an idol and they worship it. Now, you won't see a lot of people, at least in the Western world today, worshiping cows. Okay? But don't fool yourselves. Idolatry is alive and well. It's alive and well. It just takes a much more subtle form in our country and in our culture. Because idolatry at its core is about turning a good thing into an ultimate thing. What do I mean by that? Well, it shows up in our culture by how we idolize celebrities, athletes, food, family, sex, money, relationships, achievement. You name it, there's a whole list of things. Remember, these are all good things. Good things. Things that have been given by God at a certain time and place. They're gifts. And they should be appreciated and they should be valued as for what they are. But any time that a good thing occupies the ultimate place in your life, any time a good thing gives you identity and meaning and value and security and purpose and love and significance, it's occupying a place in your heart that only God should occupy. Because a good thing has now become an ultimate thing. And because an idol is rooted in something that's circumstantial, it carries with it a false promise of happiness. It will ultimately destroy you because you've vested too much interest and too much into it. You can't handle it. We don't trust God, and to compensate for that mistrust, for that distrust, we make our own gods. We make idols. And they will never fulfill us. They will only destroy us. The second point is we have something to learn about what this Exodus story and the Ten Commandments tell us about God. The first thing they tell us is that God's love is steadfast. God provided for, He loved the Israelites. He patiently waited for them to acknowledge Him and obey Him out of their love for Him. Okay, His character is such that He continually gives. He continually gives and gives to those who disobey Him, to those who don't trust Him. He gives to those even who hate Him and oppose Him. Now that's hard for us to get our heads around. Okay, it's so foreign to the way that we think of love. If someone opposes you and hates you and mistreats you, will you love them back? Will you really? No, most of us won't. It reminds me of a story of a couple I counseled years ago. The husband and wife were facing a terrible time in their marriage because the wife had chosen to be unfaithful to her husband and was continuing to choose to be unfaithful to her husband. And yet, the husband was choosing to continue to love her, to continue to be committed to her and to be patient with her, and hoping somehow beyond all hope that she would return to him and eventually reciprocate that love. She would not. She would not. And it took him a long time to finally realize that for all his love and for all his patience, this was a relationship that was not going to work, a marriage that was doomed to failure. And so he distanced himself because she was not willing to reciprocate, change her behavior, and the relationship ended. The marriage ended, sadly. God's love is something like that. That husband who's patient. He's steadfast. His patience, though, it has a limit, just like the husband. And the Exodus shows us this limit. We didn't read the whole story. But you'll notice that the people grumbled, they complained, they didn't trust God. And most of those people, most of that generation, they died in the desert. Even Moses, their leader, he didn't get to go to the promised land, the final destination, because of his own sin. And like our ancient ancestors, God will be patient with you only to a point. Only to a point. He'll put you through a lifelong training program just like he did to them, if that's what it takes for you to realize his love for you. But in the final analysis, his love is steadfast, but he will eventually leave you to your own devices. And that leads us to the next point, the final point, that God's standards are high. They're actually nothing short of perfection. Many people consider the Ten Commandments to be just another moral code. Okay, there's lots of moral codes out there. You can dig back into ancient times or modern times. There's Hammurabi, roughly contemporary with Moses. There's Buddha moving up the line, or even a modern day person like Joseph Smith. All these faiths, these people have started, they have a moral system, they have a moral code. And the code basically says that if you keep the rules, if you do good things, then you will connect with the divine, whoever that divine may be defined to be, and you will win the approval and the acceptance of God, however they define God to be. The Ten Commandments are quite different. They don't do that. They were never designed as a way to be approved of by God. Because when God gave the Ten Commandments, he had already made a covenant with, he'd already chosen the Israelites to be a holy nation. That was already done. The covenant was done. The commandments were not intended to be kept in order to be chosen by God. And so I keep the covenants, so then God chooses me. That's not the way they work. Instead, they paint a picture, they kind of show God's intent of what one's life will look like if one is chosen by God. See, there's a difference. You don't do them to get chosen, you do them because you are chosen. And this surprises many people, because they believe a widely popular but false claim that God will accept us if we are good people, and if we just keep his commandments, that he will then accept us eventually. Similarly, many people believe that as long as they avoid disobeying the big commandments and the big items like number 6, 7, and 8, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal. If they just avoid those, those are the big ones, they're kind of serious, that they'll eventually be accepted and approved of by God. The problem with this line of thought is that God's law has a unity, okay? Although God's law has many facets, it is essentially one unified expression of the character and will of God himself. Okay, and to violate the law at any one point, minor or large, is to violate the whole will of God. I need to illustrate this with an object lesson. I like object lessons. Oh, make sure I got something here. Okay. Have my faithful assistant come up here. Demonstrator post. Okay, we have a rope here. This rope represents the will of God, the law of God. Each rope, there happen to be 10 knots representing 10 commandments. Actually, you need to hold that in. Thanks. And many people believe that if they just break one, that they're all right? They've kept the other 9. Well, let's say that I do commit breaking one of the laws of God, say the 8th commandment, stealing. I commit this, that's tougher than I thought. Yeah, I need to sharpen my knife. Oh, there it goes. I've broken one, I've severed the entire continuum of law, okay? And it all falls. It breaks. It's in God's mind, it's broken. And so, thanks. Appreciate it. Didn't need that rope anyway. The person who breaks just one of these laws has become what is called by Jesus' own brother, James, in chapter 2, verse 10, a lawbreaker. The consequences are different. I'm not saying that, okay? If I go out and murder someone, the consequences, the experience I'm going to have from that is vastly different than if I covet my friend's mountain bike. Okay, those are very different things. But my legal standing before God is the same, whether that one or the other. Okay? I'm a lawbreaker. I've broken the law. So that kind of negates the argument that, well, if I just keep big ones and I can break a few little ones. No, it doesn't work that way. It's a legal standing before God. It's also important to note that murder, adultery, and stealing, the 3 big ones I just mentioned earlier, they're not exclusively external acts. Many people think they are. See, we confuse our laws with God's laws. Okay? Our laws legislate external actions, the things you do. They don't legislate your thoughts or your attitudes. That's kind of hard to do. An action can be monitored. Therefore, the laws of the state can be made based on actions, the things you do. An attitude, that's a little bit tougher to monitor, isn't it? I can't witness someone coveting my car, okay? But God can. They wouldn't covet my car, it's an old Toyota Camry. God can. God sees that. He sees into the heart. He sees into the attitude. And after Jesus undergoes a similar 40-day rigorous desert training program, sound familiar? After he undergoes this program, he begins his ministry by teaching from a mountain. Wow, coincidence? No. And he begins unpacking what committing murder and adultery and many other things actually means, what it entails. The conclusion is that breaking God's law is an attitude, long before it's ever an action. And so don't think that breaking the law of God is just about doing something bad. It's not about behavior modification. It's about something that starts in here and here first. Finally, the commandments show us really how inadequate we are in contrast to how holy God is. I think that's the main point we want to end on here. Have you ever tried keeping the Ten Commandments? Really, seriously, to a T? If you try it sometime, and I encourage you, go ahead and try it, starting today, you will quickly discover that you're not becoming a better person at all, and that you're not becoming more connected to God. Instead, you'll see how incredibly high God's standard is and how far you really fall from it. Okay? And that exposure of your soul is part of what the Ten Commandments should do and will do. I compare this to a training program I went through years ago when I was a young infantry guy in Germany. We had this annual event. It was called the 9-Megan March. Maybe if you've been in Europe, you've participated in that. It's a 100-mile march where you get to walk 25 miles a day up in Holland. It's a big celebration. It's the largest road walk or march in the world. People come from all over Europe, thousands, I think 30, 40,000. It gets bigger every year. And so, our battalion in Germany got to sponsor a team every year. We had a big tradition going. Everybody wanted to do it, of course, because it puts you as a soldier, you got to be separate duty for 3 to 4 months. That's all you did was train for this event. We went to the gym, we went to the swimming pool in Germany. And that was fun. Plus we got a free week of TDY in Holland. Everybody wanted that. So, 80 to 90 guys would show up on the first day to try out for this team. And our fearless leader was a guy named Lieutenant Jeffrey Sinclair. And he was our scout platoon leader. And I don't even think he was human. I think he was bionic, because he would take us out every morning, and this is kind of his regimen to whittle down the number of people interested. Take us out every morning, and he'd just start walking. We didn't know how far. We just said, bring your pack, bring your water, and an MRE, and we're going to walk. And he would walk and walk and walk 10, 15, 20 miles. And people would be falling off in blisters, and there'd be a little paddy wagon picking him up and taking him home. Part of his motivation was that was also the first year the Russians were sending a team, and he was determined to beat the Russian team and to have the best scores overall. Anyway, his initial regimen was not designed to show how good we were, what in great shape we were. None of us were in great shape. None of us could make his distances or his times. Only he could. He would just walk and never seem to have a blister or limp. He'd just cruise right in every day, and the rest of us were just pitiful. But his regimen, again, was not designed to show us how good we were. It was just the opposite. It was designed to expose how what in pitiful shape we were and how much we were in need of training. It would not make us better unless we submitted to his training regimen and patiently, underwent what he knew that we needed to do to train and get ready for this major event, this 100-mile walk. By the way, we did beat the Russians. That's a side note. Anyway, the commandments, the 10 commandments, are by design. They're designed to do something similar. Okay, they will not make you better, but they will show you how high God's standards are and how inadequate you are to attain that standard. They will expose your great need for God, and that will lead to your transformation if you allow it to. I'm not equating Lieutenant Sinclair with God, by the way. The Exodus, as I break this off and kind of conclude, the Exodus and the 10 Commandments show us simultaneously that God is far more loving, far more holy than we have ever imagined, and that we are in far worse condition than we ever imagined. The Exodus and the 10 Commandments, they don't give us a lot of hope. I'm just being frank with you. Look what I've told you. I've told you basically that we don't trust God. We make idols, we make our own gods and trust them. And to top it off, that God's given us 10 commandments that we really can't follow. I mean, where's the good news in that? Where's the hope? I'm not going to give you any hope this week. That may sound a little strange. I'm going to leave it as kind of a cliffhanger because we're in a series and there is hope. Believe me, we're moving towards Easter and the hope of the world is coming. But I'm not going to go there this week. I'm just going to let us sit in that for a while. I think it's good. I think that's what we need to do. And so as the band comes up, we'll get ready to sing a song, and I ask you to continue to read this story, because there's a lot more to it, a lot more details that we can't go into in 20 or 30 minutes. So, thank you. Please receive the benediction. Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart. Help us not to trust in idols or swear by false gods. Help us to receive a blessing from you, Lord, and be a generation who seek you, who seek your face. Amen. Go in peace.